Deadline for funding the government is Congressman from New Jersey's 2nd District, Republican Jeff Van Drew. Congressman Van Drew, thanks so much for joining us.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, let's start with the impeachment inquiry regarding President Biden. You serve on one of the committees that will be involved in this, the Judiciary Committee in the House. The Oversight Committee has already said that it is looking for bank records of President Biden and Hunter Biden. What documents or testimony will you be focused on getting, and what's your timeline?
Well, let's really think about why we're doing this. I mean, an impeachment inquiry means that you need to have advanced powers, that you need to be able to obtain these documents, that they shouldn't be able to use an executive privilege to stop that. This is not a matter of national security. This is a matter of getting to the truth. So we do know for fact that then Vice President Biden sat with his son dealing with Burisma, which was a company that we all know was in Ukraine and was involved in some really questionable activities and was being investigated by Shokin, who was the prosecutor then. And we want to know exactly why then Vice President Biden went to Ukraine and said that they were going to see some real repercussions if they didn't fire Shokin for investigating the company that his son was involved in. We know that and we want more information on that. We know that his family members receive money from all over the world, China, Ukraine, other areas, and they have multiple corporations set up all over, which is kind of weird and was flagged. A lot of their banking activities were flagged by the Treasury, but they were told by the White House and others to leave it alone. We want to know more about that. It's real important stuff. It just doesn't make sense. So we need the information to know, why was the prosecutor fired? Why are these different accounts? Why was $20 million? These are all factual information we already have.
So as you go through that process, if at this point, there has already been some investigating done, and there hasn't been any specific concrete evidence of wrongdoing by the president. If you find wrongdoing by Hunter Biden, do you assume that that is wrongdoing by President Biden?
No, only if President Biden was involved with him. And we literally have conversations that we do have on paper, recorded, that say that when he was speaking to the communist Chinese, that I have my father here with me. Notable references over and over again to, this isn't going to make the big guy happy. So,
and so how does that, though, prove any wrongdoing by President Biden? Might that be overstepping by Hunter Biden or another situation? What about that type of situation tells you that there was wrongdoing by President Biden?
Well, what tells me is when you sit with your son, which again we have documented, for 20 conversations with these foreign countries, and the president says, now President Biden says, he was only talking about the weather. It would be odd to have him on 20 different times. This is factual information. These aren't Jeff Van Drew talking points or Republican talking points. This we know, to have him be speaking with these different foreign countries when there was no reason to do that over and over again. They can get a weather report. They didn't need the president to get on with them to find out what the weather was going to be like. I mean, there's something here, and that's why we have to find out more.
When the impeachment process was playing out against former President Trump back in 2019, you pointed out at that time that it wasn't going to pass the Senate and said, why don't we let the people do the impeachment by voting in the electoral process the way they usually do? Why don't you feel that way this time?
I generally agree with that. This is a much, much higher level of corruption and just problematic transactions, conversations, and things that have gone on.
As Americans watch this play out, as your constituents watch this play out, what do you say to those who might look at this and say, is this just payback for Democrats impeaching President Trump twice?
What I would say to them is what I say to the hundreds of thousands that contact me and say, it is time, there's something wrong here, we need to know the truth. And that's the point. If the truth shall set you free. If I've done nothing wrong, I'll give you any information you want. What bothers me is so much of this information is being held up. We got a lot. There's obviously a lot more. If it leads to nothing, then we won't do anything. But if it leads to what we believe it's going to show us, that's very, very serious stuff.
Let's talk about where things stand as we near the deadline to pass something to fund the government by the end of the month. It is in the House where there seems to be the most disagreement on what is the way forward here. Do you foresee the House passing something that will do the job to keep the government open by that deadline, by the end of the month?
Well, two things, two real goals here. Number one, we need to keep the government open. Number two, we shouldn't be voting for bills that have provisions in them that have nothing to do with the intended purposes. For example, in the Defense Authorization Act, just in that bill and the appropriations for that, there were a lot of things in there that had to do with transgender issues, that had to do, in fact, with what they call drag queen ambassadors. There were funding for drag queen ambassadors in our military budget. This is not a Jeff Van Drew talking point. This isn't a Republican talking point. This is real stuff. So I'm not voting for that. I want our military to be the fastest, strongest, best, and sharpest in the entire world. That's what a military is supposed to do. So I think we need the continuing resolution. We need to strip these things out that don't belong in there. If we want to fund billions of dollars more for Ukraine, that should be a standalone bill, and people should either be proud to vote for it or vote against it.
Congressman Van Drew, we are a little over time ourselves. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your views today.
Take care.
On this edition of NBC